So, what's your drinking habits like, Michael?
My drinking habits?
Do you have a drinking habit?
I drink a cup of coffee in the morning.
Okay.
Sometimes it's black. Sometimes it's just with some heavy whipping cream. No sugar.
There you go.
I really can't.
Yeah.
I can't do sweet tea. Can't do sweet coffee.
Sweet tea is overly sweet. I like sweet tea, but man, they really make it sweet.
I think it was back when I was in the Navy or just out. We had started drinking some green tea.
Oh,
unsweetened.
Okay. Yeah.
And I got used to green tea unsweetened. And then maybe it was like 2 months into that. And I ordered a sweet tea, which I always did. And I was like wanted to spit the stuff out. So I drink unsweetened tea now.
Good for you. It's probably a great health decision. I should switch to totally unsweet. You drink soft drinks at all?
Yeah, occasionally.
Yeah. So you probably know where this is going because I don't know if you were in my Sunday school class, but
yeah.
So this is a review that's not anything to do with theology.
So let me try to think. Moxie.
Think about it. Yes. So Moxie, for all those out there, this is a shout out to Maine. Nanny, Leanne's grandmother, favorite drink in the world.
Yeah.
State drink of Maine.
While Zach is up going to get Moxie, he mentioned some slogans for Coca-Cola. And he mentioned one that's called, what you said, good to the last drop. And me and several of us are looking around like, that is not Coke. That is coffee. And then I looked it up, and it was one of Coke's very first. So they had it before, I guess, Maxwell or Folgers, good to the last drop.
Gotcha.
And they even say that on their website. Like, this was our slogan back at the late 1800s, early 1900s. So,
no, that's great. I am not up to date on Folgers or Maxwell. I just know when you best part of waking up is Folgers in your cup. Yeah. I just literally Googled soft drink slogans is where I got. I was like, oh, I love that 1908 slogan by Coke. But Moxie, the oldest. This is a mouthful. Oldest continuously produced soft drink in the U.S. If you're watching the video, this was originally commercially produced in 1884. Yeah. 1 year before Dr. Pepper.
Okay.
2 years before Coke. So barely.
Yeah. It's holding on.
It's holding on. And
is that a twist top or is it a pop top? Do you have a? It looks pop to here. Let me see.
Yeah. Well,
you may have. Let me see.
We might have to. Well. Oh yeah.
We
got it. Great. Let's drink a little Moxie here. Have you ever had Moxie before?
I've never had Moxie.
Wow, what a time to be alive. So if you look,
it's cane sugar, right? So it should taste. Cane sugar has a different flavor than high fructose corn syrup, which is what most of our modern day sodas are. Yeah,
and the problem with this was made back in the day. I don't think it's good.
You think this is bad?
I think this is bad. I want to get your take on it.
I can smell a hint of clove.
Yeah, so if you can see, the guy on the front is like a pharmacist. It's back in the day when everyone was like, this is for
healthy.
Health. For health.
Let's put cocaine in it. It's healthy for you.
So fortunately, did not go the cocaine route as Coke did, but it went the route of some sort of root extract that was supposed to help with your nerves, and it claimed to cure paralysis. I hope you do. You will make Nanny very happy because this is the state drink of Maine.
The scent is kind of giving eggnog a little bit.
Okay, well let's drink to this. Cheers.
Yeah, I don't think it's bad.
Oh.
Yeah, it tastes like a very like a spice.
Like it's also
it's like a if you like spice cake, if you like clove, eggnog.
And so if you're interested, so Moxie is, I think it's mostly sold in New England and I think Pennsylvania, but you can run down to your local Cracker Barrel, grab a couple of these. That's where I got this one. We were just in Maine a few weeks ago and we let our kids try it and
not a fan?
Oh, huge fans. Well, mainly because it's carbonated and sugar, and they don't drink Coke.
They don't normally. So it's like anything that's better. Yeah, there is like a bitter aftertaste.
The aftertaste is what gets you. It's like, oh, this is not too bad. And then that root extract hits you. Leanne likes to say it's like Dr. Pepper or root beer with cough syrup, and I can see that. So Moxie, Oh yeah, and I said this in the Sunday school, but I love their slogan is distinctively different, which to me is like, if you're going that route, maybe it's not the best. Right. I don't know.
No, I think it's fine. It's definitely from
glowing review from Michael Mott. It's fine.
Yeah, I mean, it's not as sweet as
that's true.
Ours, like Mountain Dew. Like this, you're not going to get
I've
that.
I've had Mountain Dew in a while. That's probably good. I used to drink so much of that.
That like concentrated, sugar rush. But yeah, it's good. It's like I would find this like if you made an ice cream out of it and served it at Christmas, that'd be really good.
All right, there you have it. Go try some Moxie, and see what you think. Today's podcast, we're gonna continue on looking at some foundational doctrines. We're doing a Sunday school class, and Michael Mott.
Oh man, it was a great Sunday school.
Best
It was
one
great.
we've had in weeks, and he's tackling. These are great because you get to take these huge concepts and boil them down to 2 weeks.
Right.
So he's trying to boil down theology proper in 2 Sundays. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, see where the conversation goes. So we're going to go ahead and take it to the next level. From the hearts of the Low Country in South Carolina,
it's the Take 2 podcast, where we take theology to the next level.
Theology proper. Sounds like fancy words.
Fancy.
What are we talking about here, Michael?
Yeah, so I mean the name of our podcast is Take 2 Theology. So theology kind of has become a byword for just talking about things of the Bible or doctrinal stuff. But the Greek word is theos. In ology, which means the study of God. So theology proper would be the study of God himself rather than some of the other tertiary things like what is the being of God, who is he?
Yeah, sounds like a big topic to tackle in 2 weeks. So did a masterful job this first Sunday. Going to wrap it up tomorrow. So I think it almost goes without saying, like, this is an important topic, but it's good to ask yourself that question. Yeah. Why do we need to get this? Like, we all believe we know there's God out there. Why do we need to know specifics or try to, think about this a little bit more definitively and iron some of these things out?
Yes. So especially in apologetics, one of the perennial questions is, do we worship the same God that the Jews do? Do we worship the same God that the Muslims do?
Yeah.
And do we worship the same God that Hindus do? Like, I can definitely say we don't.
Yeah.
There are similarities between, the Abrahamic faiths. But the more we can understand who God is, the better we can worship, the better we understand, who we're serving. Helps us, I think, when we get a clear picture of who he is, understand, just the huge gap that there is between us. Because I think a lot of people try to over-familiarize him to us. So he's just this... this nice old guy up in the clouds that gives us what we want. Yeah.
No, that's really good. And it's like you're saying, we can't understand a lot about our God. It's there. But I think the average evangelical could tell you a few things. They could say God's loving. They would maybe say God's sovereign. God is just. God is merciful. But I think you're right too. They would have a hard time going past that or explaining like how is he both of these things or some very good question, like impassibility. That one's off the beaten path, but that's a good one to talk about. Maybe we can develop that more.
It raised a lot of questions.
Because that is a confusing one. I think it's not intuitive either until you explain it and put some flesh on it.
Yeah.
And so, I think there's a lot we can talk about here. You started off your Sunday school with this great quote by A.W. Tozer that what comes into our minds when we think about God is the most important thing about us. That's a strong statement, but so true that when you hear if you ask someone about God and they give you their 2-sentence answer, that tells you so much about not only what they think about God, but how they live their life, how they structure so much the paradigm, their worldview. So that's such a good question. It's good to be able to wrap our minds around these things.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And really, we're kind of talking about God being other, God being familiar to us. And there's these kind of 2 different adjectives that we use. And, I talk a lot about, ditches in our walk in theology. And what I mean by that is if you're driving down the road, you have a ditch on each side. And which ditch do you want to be in?
Yeah.
Neither one, right?
Right. Don't be in the ditches.
Yeah. And so you can go to these extremes. And so, but one side of this is the transcendent nature of God. He's just totally other, but also the immanence side of God.
Immanence.
Immanence. Yeah.
I'm just kidding. Yeah, I was trying to say it the other immanence, just like you know.
Yeah. So it's not the imminent, like, hey, this is going to happen in any moment. Like that's just an imminent thing. It's like something emanating. It's that type of word. But his presence, his knowability, can we know him? And if we just go all the way over to immanence, well, we've missed who God is. If we go all the way over to transcendence, well, God has revealed himself to us. And so what I tried to do, because I think probably today we focus more on the immanence of God. And so I opened up, all of the first lesson was really on the transcendent properties of who God is.
That's great how you structured and focused on that. And a lot of these, I like the words you used. We'll get into it more because I think it's so accurate, so good, and it gives us good language. It's we can use this precise language, and it made sense how you laid it out. This via negativa. So we can get down to that. I don't want to skip through too much, but even talking about God's transcendence, you were bringing in your Thomist roots a little bit here,
Yeah. So, and this isn't like just to Thomism. True. But so most places, well, I guess I shouldn't say most places because I've only been to seminary one place. But I think most people will talk about how, even when you said God is sovereign, God is loving, what do we mean by those words? Like we have an idea of what it means for a king to be sovereign, or for maybe a husband to be loving. We have an idea what it means for a dog to be loving. What does it mean for a being who is like God to be loving? And so we're talking about how we describe God. Like when I attribute something to a predicate of something, attribute something to someone, I can do that univocally, which really means one voice. So there's no change. Like, there's no way to misunderstand it. It's like I'm speaking 100% truth. Equivocally, which means that I'm really saying one thing, but I mean something else. So like if I say my wife is a ray of sunshine, I'm speaking figuratively. I'm not speaking univocally.
Are you speaking sarcastically?
No,
I'm just kidding. No. Just clear, Jill. He meant that.
Yeah. And so when we speak by analogy, really, it's like part of it is univocal or univocal, and part of it is equivocal. And so when I say, Spot is a good dog, we know what that means. When I say Zach is a good husband, we know what that means. When I say God is a good God, we really don't know fully what that means. I'm speaking by analogy. So there's part of that we understand. Yeah. There's part of it that we don't understand. And so really because of God's transcendence, the way we can speak most accurately about God is we call it the via negativa, which we don't ascribe to him positive attributes, but we negate attributes of creatures. So we negate creaturely attributes away from God. And so via negativa, this Latin phrase, the path of the negative, would be maybe one translation of that.
Great, because in scholastic thought or Thomism, it's like the via negativa. There's like the way of immanence is one thing. Am I making this up? And there's like the way, I don't know.
Yeah, so for us, it was either via negativa or by analogy. So tomorrow
those are the two. Gotcha.
Yeah. So tomorrow we will do, tomorrow for us, we'll do by analogy, but the first Sunday was via negativa. Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, we'll jump into some of these, and so because we're trying to describe what God isn't, you'll see a lot of these, prefixes look the same as saying God is not, and then the other things. So the first one is incorporeal.
Yeah.
Incorporeal.
Yeah. And so I was kind of going over these with Jill the night before, and I was like, Jill, just give me like.
Oh yeah.
And she's like, I don't think people are going to know what incorporeal means. So, but if you think of a corpus, like a body of text, or there's a corpse, there's a body there.
Yeah.
Or corporal punishment, that's where you are inflicting pain on the body. So that root word in there, corp or corpse, just means body. And so God is incorporeal. He has no body. He's not made of physical stuff.
And so we already run into problems because the Bible talks all about him having hands and eyes and, so
feathers.
If you really want to go, having, he's a rock. So we can talk about some of that later too, but it's good to keep these kind of things in mind.
Yeah. And so what we're talking about is God in his essence. So later on, we're going to talk about Christology. I think is Danny doing
I think
that?
Danny's tackling that, yeah.
And so we know that the second person of the Godhead took on a body. So we'll talk about how that works. But God proper doesn't have a body.
Second one, immutable, meaning he can't change.
Right.
And I like that you keep giving us like the root words or the etymology a little bit. Yeah. I think that helps paint it out.
Yeah, and we see there's lots of scripture. I put together a document that kind of has more details here because remember, in Sunday school, we're going pretty fast.
Boom.
But we know God can't change, and if he could change, that would be a bad thing.
That'd be a very bad thing. And I think, all of these attributes don't exist in a vacuum, but you kind of see they support each other because he's immutable. Other things we're going to see they can't change either because some of these things I think don't sound super intuitive. Speaking of which, this next one I think is a challenging one, the impassibility of God. God is impassible. What's that mean? And then we can maybe discuss that more.
Yeah, so the root word here is pass, which you would hear from like passions. So like, man, I was passionately against something, or the people rose with passion. And so impassibility would mean that God does not have passions that rise and fall. So he's not reacting to things as they happen.
No, that's good. I like that, not reacting, because when I read scripture, it seems like he's very passionate against sin.
Yeah.
It seems like, he finds joy in certain things. So it seems like he has passions.
Right. And in a sense, he does have passions, but those passions are an eternal, settled disposition towards certain things. So he has a settled disposition of wrath against sin. He has a settled disposition of love towards the things that he's created, a settled disposition of love towards the Son. So from eternity, and remember, he's not changing. We haven't gotten to eternal yet, or atemporal, but he is in an eternal now. And so he's not experiencing the timeline like we experience time.
Like, I don't know what's going to happen next, so I am going to react in a way where he sees everything at the same time, whatever that means. And so, that it's just a whole different perspective. I think that's part of the reason. And then I think part of it's just the language. It's, you can't have this perfect like passions. It means emotions. There are emotions, but he's not reacting, and
Yeah, and the Bible uses these, anthropomorphisms or anthropopology. What did you say?
Pathism or something?
Pathisms, yeah. So, because it is trying to help us not be all the way on the transcendent side, but to help us understand. Because from our perspective, it might seem like, man, God got really angry there. Because we are experiencing it in time. But we know God proper in his... and so is it okay? One of the questions I got was, well, what do we believe? Like, was God angry at Korah? Yes, he was angry at Korah. And we can even, everyday life, we can go along thinking, man, God got angry at Korah, or God repented of, creating man. And there's a sense from eternity when man falls, God's hurt from that. But that's an eternal passion that he has. He has a set disposition. It didn't take him by surprise. It's all part of his plan. So we shouldn't think of God being up on the throne being like, good job. Oh no. Yes. No. He knows everything. He's impassible.
Yeah. I think that's a good way to look at it too. Like, what's the alternative? The alternative is that it's like, I hope Michael makes it. I hope, he didn't do it. It's like, no, he knows this. And the alternative is, if he doesn't know this, then all these other things we read in scripture, they don't stack up either. It's not consistent. I think that's the nice thing about a class like this. You kind of organize things in a systematic way. The next one is a little bit more easy, not easy to understand, but it's a more familiar term. God is infinite.
Yeah, not finite. He's not limited. So there's nothing about his body. We don't mean that he's infinite in number. It's not like he's but he is not limited. There's no limit to his being.
God is atemporal.
Yeah.
I never know where to put this syllable.
Yeah. Either one's fine. Because and really, we're going to talk about his aseity here in a little bit, but because he exists on his own, he's the ground of being. He has to be eternal. He can't participate in time. Part of that is, there's a lot of interlocking things here. I'm trying to think about how to best do it, but he doesn't participate in time. If something participates in time, then it has to have a beginning. God doesn't have a beginning. We know he's And so if God had a beginning, there would be another being that would have to exist that didn't have a beginning because so there has to be a non-moved mover to talk about, a philosophical God. And so that God is eternal. He is atemporal, not participating in time.
So he's been around since eternity past, is what you're telling me.
Yeah, so don't use the word eternity past or eternity future because there's no past or future or present. Well, it's just all present.
All present all the time. It's
Yeah.
a good thing to try to think about.
And there has been a wave. So I'll just say William Lane Craig has come out. He wrote God, Time, and Eternity. It is part of my life's goal. Maybe we'll talk about it on this podcast to read through. I've read through it enough to write a paper when I was in graduate school. But I want to read through it enough to, because there's different levels of reading. But long story short, he has come out and said that once God started creating things, he became in time, which is I think is
because then you lose some of this.
How does an eternal God who's in an eternal present become a God who is now in time? It's like I was off of the timeline and now I put myself on the timeline. That doesn't even make sense.
Yeah, very, very bizarre.
So that's out there,
That's great. Next one, another one that's a little bit easier for us to think. God is invisible. No man's seen God at any time.
Right. Yep.
And then omnipresent. You're switching it up, Michael. We're throwing omni in there.
Yeah. So some of these don't work as well in English, but the way that you would negate this is he's not limited in scope. He's not limited in his presence or awareness. He is everywhere. And the example I use in class, it's not like, you think of a piece of bread and you want peanut butter or you love mayonnaise, right?
No. Actually, I've come around. I like a little bit of mayonnaise goes a long way, but man, you can do too much. You can go quickly the wrong direction.
I can take like a whole tablespoon of that stuff, put it on there. But anyways, you can think of, if I spread that out, mayonnaise is everywhere. But that is not what we mean. We don't mean that there's a little bit of God spread out everywhere. All of God is everywhere. So he is present everywhere. There's no, there's the Psalms that talk about that. There's no way where I can run from you. He is fully present everywhere.
And
no
then,
limit to that.
One of my favorite ones, God's aseity. If you ever just need to just flex those theological guns, get those muscles out, just say my favorite attribute's aseity.
Yeah. And I had to look up what the adjectival verb
I was
was.
like, that's crazy.
It's aseitic, but it means that he's not dependent or contingent on any other being for his existence. He exists in and of himself. And this is a huge deal in Thomism because philosophers rightly saw this idea that like you as a creature, you have existence and you have the potential to change. And so everything that we come into contact with here in the physical realm has those two properties. It has actual existence, which we would call act or actuality, and it has potential to change, and it has a nature that kind of governs its potentials. But everything that has potential cannot be the cause of its own existence. There's got to be something that caused it, and you can't go forever in this backward chain. So there has to be a being whose essence or nature is to exist itself and not have any potential. So you can say God, there's no potential with God, and some people will misunderstand you. But what we mean is God's not going to get better. He's already the best he can be. He's not going to get worse. He's not going to change in some way. So this kind of goes back to his immutability. He has no potential. He is pure existence itself. And Moses asked him what his name is. I am.
That's really, really good. And then this last one is also one I think causes people to scratch their head. God is simple.
Yeah. And it would be tempting to go, God's not simple.
Right. I think that's the gut reaction.
Yeah, he's not simple. But what we mean is in his ontology. And when I said that to my wife, she's like, okay, okay. No one's going to understand what you're trying to say, Michael. But in his being himself, he is simple. So you can think of a human, what is it, 200 and something bones, 300 bones?
There you go. Like, something like that. 206. And then they wrote, yeah.
We got all these bones, we got all these tendons and ligaments, we got these muscles, we got, we have a bunch of different parts. We are very complex. But even something like this Tervis has parts, it's creative of two different sections of plastics that's been melded together. And then even in the plastic, we would say, well, there's different polymers that have been, so all of the physical stuff we run into is fairly complex. There's parts of that hold it together. God, being pure essence, is simple. Wow. There's no parts. In kind of the go-to passage for this, because this is actually kind of, if I'm honest, there are some scriptures that kind of hint at this, like, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one." But this is kind of more of something we arrive at philosophically.
Because I think the other area people struggle with this would say, well, God is love plus justice plus mercy plus holiness. But no, God is simple. God is love. God he's infinitely love, justice, mercy. He's not a composite of all these attributes.
Yeah, and that is another huge deal, because a simple being like God, we think discursively, which means we think about one thing and then we move on to B, and then we move on to C, and we move on to... God doesn't think that way. He apprehends all things from eternity. And his properties, I shouldn't say properties, his attributes, things that we can attribute to him, we think of those by kind of onesie-twosies. But even when we're talking to him, you can kind of see how they're related. But in a being who is simple, he only has one attribute, his essence. Yeah. And we understand it kind of by breaking it apart. But his love is his
righteousness.
Is his righteousness, is all those, is his invisibility, is his infinite. Like all of those, he is just himself. Yeah. And then we kind of understand it. And he relates himself. It's not wrong to say God is love. So I wouldn't want you to walk away thinking, well, Michael said we can't really differentiate these attributes. You can, because that's how we understand them. But we know really there is only one.
And really the worst way people do this are like, well, God was hateful in the Old Testament and love. Or so they really break it. That's like the farthest away. Right. Most people maybe aren't there, but they're like, well, he's these different things. But no, like God is a good takeaway. And these are all incommunicable, which is something I feel like we only hear about with diseases.
Yeah. So if I have COVID-19, a very communicable disease, I could give that to you. But these attributes that we've talked about, God can't give them to us. He cannot make us have aseity. He can't make us be atemporal. He can't make us be impassible or immutable. He can't give that to us. These are properties that he himself has. Now, next time we talk, next lesson, we'll talk about some of his communicable attributes and most of those are things that we talk about by analogy as well.
Now, this is great. Point us to the transcendence. So, what do we do this? What are some things we want to take away? We know these attributes. I think these are good things to meditate on how great our God is. But how do we, what do we do with this? Where do we go?
Yeah, I think for me, when I think about, and I know that I'm maybe a little different stripe than most people, but I can really revel and worship when I think about God being pure existence, existence itself. So you think about, I'm trying to think about how to do this the fastest in a podcast, but you can think about a unicorn. This is kind of the example I like to give.
That's good.
And you can describe what a unicorn is. And if I showed you a picture of something, you'd be like, that's not a unicorn. Like, how do you know what a unicorn is? They don't exist. Well, you kind of know the nature of what it means to be a unicorn. We have kind of defined that word. So by thinking about that, hopefully you can kind of see the difference between existence and essence, right? And existence itself, pure existence, can't be created or destroyed, right? So because in order to create existence, you'd have to have something that existed to create it. In order to destroy it, you'd have to have something that destroyed it, which would have existence. So God is the ground of all existence. So you and me, we're existing right now, but we don't have our own existence. It's not like I am borrowing. I am existing because of God's existence. So like I don't want to take anything away from the creation. Huge event. It's like that and the Exodus are kind of the big things that, the Old Testament saints would refer to all the time to kind of show God's mighty hand. But every moment of our existence, God is sustaining us by his existence.
That's really good.
Yeah.
Man, that's a good one good thing to take away from that, where God's transcendence is so important that there is this creator-creature distinction, and that's a really good thing, that it's not all dependent on you or even dependent on your environment or whatever. It's like, God's got this under control. Where do you want to go from here, Michael? You want to read some Norm Geisler? You want to read some
Parmenides?
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah. So I don't think we had to read through all of this, but Parmenides was this pre-Socratic philosopher, and they were struggling with some of these basic questions. I mean, all philosophers are struggling with some basic questions. And he was the first guy to really kind of come on the scene and talk about existence itself. Now, he misapplies it. So he tries to apply the properties of existence itself, which we would say properly understood is God. He tries to apply that to everything. And Aristotle is going to come along and correct some of that. And then Thomas Aquinas is going to really pick up Aristotle's philosophy and sanctify it. So there's kind of the chain of events there.
Before you get into it, because I know this is what you're saying, but it's like, it is interesting that you can look out and reason, and you get some really good underlying thoughts. You can clearly perceive God, but it's like, when people miss up, you're like, you're so close. Or like these scientists, these people, these great thinkers, and you're like, man, I'm tracking. Oh, we misstepped. Or, it's like, it's all there. Yeah.
Yeah. It's almost like what we talked about in your Sunday school lesson.
Right.
Special revelation is necessity.
Yes,
it's a necessity. It's required in order to kind of finally get these finer leaps. But Parmenides would say that being itself is eternal and unchanging, that there is a unity of being, so there's not indivisible, so that would kind of go to our simplicity. That being is immutable, it can't change, it's timeless. And so these things, like huge things, and I'm not saying every, common Joe is going to come up with these things, but if we kind of look at life really critically and we kind of lean on the people who God has gifted that way, you can really see the force of Romans 1, where Paul says that God's, invisible qualities have been clearly made known by the things that we can see, or Psalm 19 that says the heavens are pouring forth speech night and day. Like, from what God has created, he has made himself known. And Parmenides is hinting at that. And in class, I read through, and we don't have to read through all this, but there's lots of scripture that will talk about, God creating everything. There was nothing made without him that was made, that in him all the fullness of deity dwelled. He was before all things exist in him. So all of these verses that would be like what we'd take Parmenides and then sanctify them. Then we would get these ideas that God is those things. And then we end up with this, we have already talked about, but Yahweh, I am.
Yeah.
Like, he is the foundation of all being.
No, I there's one thing to take away. I like the I am. Everything's like just wrapped up into this name of Yahweh. And you ended with God is holy, holy, holy. This transcendence helps us think on those levels. Like I think everyone wants to gravitate the other way, and it's like good to think about the transcendence of God.
He's set apart. Yeah, he's set apart.
That is good. You think of Isaiah 6 and these great passages, and then you ended with your name, which I guess that means I just always have to say Michael.
Yeah.
I always have to end with a question because you explained it. Well, what does your name mean?
Yeah. So in Hebrew, it would be pronounced closer to like how we would pronounce Mikhail Gorbachev's, but Mikael, which would mean me is like who, the Ka is like, and El we should know is like El Shaddai or all the other names of God is God. So my name is a question, like who is like God? And like, it's a rhetorical question. There's no one like God. He's set apart. He is a singular being.
Michael.
Yeah,
there you
Michael.
go. I always like a good name. What's a name mean? When people don't know what their name means, I'm devastated. I'm like, you should just know this. This is a good thing to know. That's a great way to end. Who is like God? And then be on the lookout. Next week, we'll kind of wrap this up, hit the other side, the immanence side of it. So looking forward to that. Thanks, Michael, for breaking down some of this theology proper for us.
Awesome.
That's our take. Thanks for listening to Take Two. Find us wherever you find podcasts and on YouTube for those who want to watch our videocast.